Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning and for the first time in your life, you don't care what anyone thinks, not your boss, not your so-called friends, not even the voices from your past echoing inside your head. You simply act in alignment with your deepest convictions, your values, and your integrity. What would that feel like? Freedom, power, peace. But the real question is, why haven't you done it yet? Let me tell you why: because you've been trained, conditioned, and rewarded for being agreeable, for sacrificing your truth for harmony, for becoming a slave to external validation. And that, my friend, is not virtue. That is self-betrayal, the act of people. Pleasing is not kindness, it's cowardice dressed up as compassion. It's a subtle, dangerous game you play with your own soul, where you say yes when you want to scream no, where you nod in agreement while your spirit twists in rebellion. Why? Because you're afraid. You're afraid of rejection, of conflict, of being alone, so you make yourself small, predictable, convenient, but there is a dark cost. Every time you betray your authentic voice to maintain peace, you reinforce the belief that you don't matter, that your opinions, desires, and dreams are less important than keeping others comfortable. You build a prison and then decorate it with approval, applause, and fake smiles. That's not love. That's manipulation of yourself by yourself. And sooner or later, the real you starts to wither. We've confused being liked with being good, but history, literature, and life itself show us that those who stand for truth are rarely celebrated at first. They're criticized, misunderstood, isolated. The path of integrity is not popular, it's painful, but it's also the only path that leads to genuine self-respect. Ask yourself, are you living a life that you respect? Are your actions dictated by truth or by fear of judgment? The harsh truth is that if everyone likes you, it probably means you're not standing for anything. Morality requires courage. Values demand action. Doing what's right might make you enemies, but failing to do what's right will eventually make you an enemy of yourself. You wear masks, one for your family, one for work, one for friends, one for social media. And with each new mask, you lose sight of who you really are. You're not a person, you're a performance. You're not living, you're reacting. It's like being on stage 24/7, hoping your audience won't boo. And you wonder why you're tired, why your anxiety won't go away, why you can't sleep or look at yourself in the mirror with pride. It's because fragmentation kills the soul. Wholeness comes from alignment. The inner and outer must match. When you do what's right for you, not in rebellion but in truth, you stop performing and start being. The energy that was once spent on managing impressions is now used to build a life that's real, meaningful, and sustainable. Some people think stopping people pleasing means becoming arrogant or selfish. That's a lie. Authenticity is not rebellion for its own sake, it's responsibility. It's speaking the truth with weight, with consideration, with maturity. It means you don't just act out because you're tired of being nice. You act in because you're committed to being real. Responsibility is the cornerstone. You don't ignore others, you just stop abandoning yourself. You take ownership of your life, your choices, your values, and your direction. You become the author of your own story, not the victim, not the passive character, but the one who shapes the arc and determines the ending. That's not selfish, that's spiritual integrity. So I ask you, when are you going to stop trading your peace for approval? When are you going to stop living your life like it's a democracy where everyone gets a vote except you? Draw a line, not in anger but in clarity. Stop people pleasing. Start doing what's right, not just for comfort, not just for success, but for the sake of your soul. Because at the end of the day, if you don't live in alignment with your truth, you will pay the price, and no one else will bear that cost for you. Make the shift, take the stand, reclaim your self-respect. Because when you stop seeking permission to be yourself, you finally remember you were never meant to please, you were meant to live. The act of people pleasing is not rooted in kindness as many often believe, it is deeply rooted in fear. At its core, it is a strategy for self-preservation, not compassion. When you people please, you are not doing it because you genuinely want to help or because your values are aligned with the request or expectation. You're doing it to avoid conflict. You're doing it to escape judgment. You're doing it because, somewhere along the line, you began to equate being liked with being safe. You mistakenly started to believe that your worth is tied to your ability to make others happy, even at the cost of your own well-being. This behavior usually begins in childhood. When you're young and vulnerable, you learn very quickly what gets you approval and what gets you rejection. You learn to read faces, tones, atmospheres. You become a master at sensing other people's emotions, sometimes more than your own. You might have been praised when you were quiet, compliant, helpful. You might have been criticized or shamed when you expressed your needs, showed anger, or stepped out of line. So you adapted, you performed, you shaped yourself into what others needed, wanted, or demanded. And because it kept you safe, then, you kept doing it long after the threat was gone. But the truth is, every time you choose harmony over honesty, every time you say yes while your soul screams no, you chip away at your authenticity. You start losing track of what you actually want. Your desires blur into the expectations of others. Your preferences get buried under politeness. You become agreeable to avoid the risk of being disliked. But in doing so, you create a life that's agreeable to everyone except you. That's not virtue. That's quiet desperation. What people often don't realize is that pleasing is a subtle form of self-neglect. You're telling yourself, day in and day out, that your needs don't matter as much as everyone else's. You give your time away, you lend your energy, you shrink yourself to fit the mood of the room, and the worst part is, most people won't even notice, they won't thank you, they won't applaud you, because people will take what you give them and assume it was free. Meanwhile, you're the one paying the invisible price of chronic self-abandonment, and here's what's terrifying. Eventually, you don't even know who you are anymore without the performance. The mask becomes fused to your face. The fear becomes your default lens, and you begin to live not as a human being, but as a projection of who you think the world wants you to be. We live in a world where being liked is dangerously overrated. We've been taught, explicitly and implicitly, that the highest achievement is universal acceptance, to be agreeable, to be admired, and to be seen as good in everyone's eyes. But what no one tells you is that living for approval is a moral compromise. It forces you to dilute your values, ignore your instincts, and compromise your integrity just to avoid discomfort. Doing what is right, not what is popular, not what is convenient, is the only real path to developing self-respect, and it often comes at the cost of external validation. When you make the decision to live by your own principles, you're bound to disrupt the status quo. People won't always like you for it. Some will push back. Some will question you. Others will try to guilt you back into compliance. That's the cost of integrity, discomfort, and yet that very discomfort is evidence that you're walking your own path, because anyone who has ever stood for something meaningful has had to stand alone at some point. Great thinkers, artists, and leaders didn't rise by pleasing crowds. They rose by doing what was difficult, necessary, and aligned with something deeper than approval. The reality is that doing what's right demands a kind of inner toughness. It requires that you look in the mirror and know, even if no one else supports you, that you are acting in accordance with your beliefs. It's not about being stubborn or aggressive. It's about being firm and clear in who you are. You learn to face the discomfort of rejection without folding. You begin to trust your own judgment more than the opinions of others, and in that process, you develop something rare, character. Living with integrity doesn't mean being perfect. It means being honest. It means your words match your actions. It means you don't betray your own values just to avoid being disliked. That takes courage, and courage isn't comfortable. But comfort is overrated when it comes at the cost of your own self-worth. You can either spend your life chasing approval from others, or you can build a life where you approve of yourself even when no one else claps, It's easy to go along with what everyone expects. It's easy to bite your tongue to keep the peace. But the moment you decide to prioritize what's right over what's easy, you begin to take ownership of your life. You become someone you can rely on, and that matters far more than any applause ever will. When you live your life constantly trying to meet the expectations of others, you begin to fracture. Your identity, which should be a unified, coherent sense of self, becomes scattered into pieces. You show one face to your boss, another to your parents, a different one to your friends, and yet another to strangers online. Over time, you become a collage of roles, performances, and masks, none of which actually reflect the real you. This fragmentation is exhausting. You're constantly monitoring, adjusting, calculating, trying to say the right thing, react the right way, appear the way others want you to. It's not just mentally draining, it's spiritually hollowing. You begin to lose the ability to hear your own voice. You forget what you actually think about things, what you actually want, because you've trained yourself to scan the room for cues first. You can't make decisions without second, guessing them through the lens of someone else's imagined reaction. That's not discernment, that's dependency. You're not anchored in yourself. You're adrift in the sea of other people's opinions. And you start to feel that heaviness, the low-grade anxiety, the indecisiveness, the deep fatigue that comes from living out of alignment. This chronic people-pleasing creates a life that feels busy but not fulfilling. You're doing a lot, saying yes to everything, always being agreeable, and yet you're not actually living. You're performing, and performances by their nature must end. You'll reach a point, perhaps in a moment of crisis, burnout, or silent breakdown where you realize you can't keep it up. The energy it takes to be everything to everyone is unsustainable, and in that moment, you'll either collapse or you'll confront the truth. You've built a life that looks right on the outside, but feels wrong on the inside. Reclaiming your wholeness starts with identifying where you've been fragmented. Where have you been editing yourself to fit in? Who are you pretending to be in order to be liked? And why have you believed that version of yourself was more acceptable than the real one? The pain of fragmentation is not just that you're tired, it's that deep down you know you're being false, and no amount of external praise can make up for the internal cache of living a lie. The real path to peace is integration. Bringing your words, your values, and your actions into alignment. But that means letting go of the roles that were never yours to play. It means stepping out from behind the mask, knowing some people won't recognize you anymore and being okay with that. Because finally, for the first time, you will. There's a dangerous misconception in modern culture that authenticity means saying whatever you want, whenever you want, without filter or regard for anyone else. That's not authenticity, that's immaturity dressed up as rebellion. True authenticity isn't about defiance for the sake of attention. It's not about being loud, difficult, or aggressive just because you're tired of being walked on. Authenticity, real, grounded authenticity, is built on responsibility. It's about being honest with yourself and others in a way that is both courageous and considered. It means showing up as who you are, but also recognizing the weight of your words, the impact of your actions, and the depth of your choices. When you begin to break free from the compulsion to please others, the temptation is to swing to the opposite extreme. You might feel the urge to burn every bridge, cut off every person who disagrees with you, or reject anything that remotely feels like compromise. But that's not healing, that's reaction. It's still driven by pain, by resentment, by a desire to punish others for the years you spent in silence. That's not power, that's unresolved emotion, still steering the wheel. True growth is more deliberate, more thoughtful. It doesn't seek revenge for past submission. It seeks alignment. To live authentically is to live with clarity. You don't need to shout to be firm. You don't need to be cruel to be truthful. In fact, the more in tune you are with your values, the more precise and disciplined your actions become. You stop over-explaining. You stop justifying, you no longer offer excuses or apologies for living in a way that reflects what you believe is right. That's not rebellion, that's integrity. Responsibility means accepting that your choices have consequences and choosing anyway. It means risking disappointment, disapproval, and even loss for the sake of inner congruence. You're not acting out to provoke others. You're acting in to align with yourself. You don't speak truth just to offend, you speak truth because silence has cost you too much. That's the essence of a life lived well, not in the chaos of reaction, but in the clarity of conviction. And what emerges from this place is not arrogance, but peace, not recklessness, but stability. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to rely on your own compass rather than chasing validation from the crowd. And in doing so, you develop a quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need approval to stand tall. You're no longer chasing freedom from others, you're building it within. When you finally begin to break the chains of people pleasing, you start to uncover just how deeply it has shaped every corner of your life. You begin to see how many of your decisions were made not from desire but from fear. You recognize how often you abandoned your voice to avoid discomfort, and most importantly, you feel the aching weight of years spent managing impressions rather than living authentically. It is a sobering realization, one that demands both grief and courage. Grief for the time and energy lost in performing a version of yourself that was never truly real, and courage to now rebuild a life rooted in truth, not approval. The journey back to yourself is not marked by grand gestures or dramatic ultimatums. It is made in the quiet moments when you choose to tell the truth instead of agreeing out of habit. It happens when you disappoint someone in order to stay honest with your own boundaries. It deepens when you stop apologizing for having needs, preferences, and a voice that does not echo the crowd. Every small decision to live in integrity, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable, is a declaration that your life will no longer be dictated by the fear of disapproval. It's a choice to stop outsourcing your self-worth and to stand fully in your own authority. This isn't an easy path. It often involves loss. You may lose relationships that were sustained only by your willingness to betray yourself. You may face tension in places where you were once seen as easygoing, or the one who never causes problems, but the space that's left behind by those losses is not empty, it's sacred. It becomes the ground where something honest and strong can grow. You begin to attract people, opportunities, and experiences that resonate with who you truly are, not the version you pretended to be. That's the paradox. By being willing to be disliked, you finally find the possibility of being loved not for your performance, but for your presence. And at last, the most profound shift occurs. You stop seeking permission to live your life. You stop needing external applause to feel valid. You become someone you trust, someone you respect, someone you can look in the mirror and see with clarity. That is the reward of doing what's right for you, not selfishness, not rebellion, but liberation. Not just from others, but from the false self you once thought you had to be. In that freedom, you finally come home to yourself. Thank you for taking the time to engage with this message and reflect deeply on its truth. If this speech resonated with you, if it stirred something inside you, challenged your perspective, or gave you the courage to take even one step closer to your authentic self, then it has served its purpose. This is more than just a collection of words. It's a call to action, a reminder that your life is not meant to be performed, it's meant to be lived, fully and unapologetically. As you move forward, I hope you carry this message with strength, with clarity, and with conviction. You owe it to yourself to live with integrity, to make choices that honor who you truly are, and to let go of the exhausting need to be all things to everyone. If you choose to share this, upload it, or present it to others, do so with pride not just in the message, but in the courage it takes to live by it. Your voice matters, your truth matters, and the moment you stop asking for permission to be yourself, you give others permission to do the same. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for daring to live more honestly. This journey isn't easy, but it's worth every difficult step. Until next time, thank you, take care of yourself, and goodbye.